So, welcome to episode 28 of Breaking Bio. I'm Morgan Jackson. I'm a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. And today we've got a couple of other co-hosts with us. We've got...
I'm Heidi Smith. I'm a postdoc at the University of Texas at Austin.
Hi, I'm Tom Housley, a PhD student at the University of Stirling in Scotland.
And our special guest today is Patty Jones from the University of Texas, Austin as well. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Patty?
I am a fifth-year graduate student in Mike Ryan's lab at UT. Our lab is focused mostly on sexual selection in frogs, but I study the predator of the tundra frog that our lab studies. I study the frog-eating bat, Trichopsirosis, which is a tropical bat species that hunts tundra frogs by listening for the frogs' calls. And that's what I've been working on mostly in Panama for my PhD for the past couple of years.
I don't actually know this, even though we're in a lab together. Were you a bat person before you started this project?
No, I did my undergrad at Cornell, and I worked on lobsters, and I worked on aphids and ants, and then I had a bird project. I didn't actually have any intention of working on bats until I got here. I joined this lab to do frog behavior, and then got really excited about foraging behavior in general, and ended up focusing on the bats. So I didn't know anything about bats. I had no intention of working with bats.
I mean, Austin's a good place to work on bats, I guess, even though you don't work on the bats here.
Austin is an awesome place to work on bats because there's so much public awareness. Austin has the largest urban bat colony in the world, and there's a lot of public awareness about the benefits of bats here, and tourists come from all over to see the bats here. So when I tell people in Austin that I work on bats, I get a really positive response. People say, oh, bats are cool, or oh, bats eat mosquitoes. And whereas when I tell people at home, I grew up in Boston, I tell people at home I work on bats, and they say, oh, gross. I have them in my house and I hate them, and how do I kill them is a much more typical response. So it's pretty awesome to work on bats in Austin.
Have you ever caught any of the bats here? Like, have you ever netted any bats here, or you've only done research in Panama?
I would love to. I haven't. We should get the lab to do this. I really want to go out to Big Bend in West Texas and net bats there, because that has a higher diversity of bats than anywhere else in Texas. And that would be really cool.
Oh, I'd be into it. I also need to update my rabies shot, so
yeah,
that would be all right.
I think it'd be fun. So I hope so. I see the bats coming out from under the bridge all the time, which is really spectacular. If you guys haven't been to Austin, you should come, because it's like this plumes, it's like smoke streams of more than 1 million bats coming out from underneath this bridge, and red-tailed hawks coming in and grabbing them out of the air as they're flying out from under the bridge. And it's really cool. It's quite a sight.
But wait, your bats, they're the only tricops ones, right? Is that right?
They are the only species in the genus Trichops, yes. Or Thracops, as the Germans say.
I guess sounds better. That's nice with a German accent, perhaps.
Yeah.
Frog-eating bats. I watched a couple of videos on your lab's webpage, and it looks like the easiest meal possible. The frogs, adorable as they are, look like they're just waiting to get picked off.
They are like little floating targets, absolutely.
So is it a pretty high success rate for the bats, or like is this just pretty much shooting fish in a barrel for them? I think that they have, I don't have the data in front of me on that. There is a study on that, but I would say it's more than 50% success rate, probably. And if you sit and watch a little pond of frogs calling for long enough, you'll see the bats pick them off. And how it's sort of miraculous. They're such easy prey. But I guess they just reproduce fast enough that they manage to persist.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's like a sushi thing with a conveyor.
Yeah, because they get all inflated, and then they float, all these little inflated frogs on the surface of the water, and they're so easy to pick out in comparison to lots of other tropical frog species that are calling in under the vegetation or on top of leaves. And sometimes when you're trying to record them, you'll know there's an individual there. You've been recording them for 10 minutes, but you still can't figure out where it is. You can't find it. Tundra frogs are like sitting ducks.
Literally, almost.
Yeah. Sitting frogs, yeah.
So if the lab is mostly concerned with sexual selection, can you give a kind of overview of how sexual selection in frogs kind of integrates with you looking at bats eating them?
That is a great question. So that is why my advisor, Mike Ryan, started studying this system, is because Tungara frogs, they make complex calls and they make simple calls. So a simple call is just this whine sound, a tung sound, and a complex call is the tung followed by multiple little syllables at the end. So their name, Tungara frog, is onomatopoeia for the way that the call sounds, because it's a Tungara call sound. So they make simple calls, and the simple calls are, they then can facultatively add these complex syllables to it. And those complex calls are more attractive to female frogs. Female frogs prefer to approach a male who's making complex calls. But the frog-eating bats also prefer to approach a male who's making complex calls. So that puts this male frog in a, between a rock and a hard place. That if he makes more complex calls, he's more likely to get a female, and he's also more likely to get eaten by a frog-eating bat. So sexual selection is driving him toward making more complex calls, and natural selection is driving him back down towards making simple calls. So it's this really nice system for looking at how the costs of sexual selection, the costs of making an elaborate sexual signal.
Are there frogs that are in better condition or making the more complex calls so the bats are getting a better meal from them, or is it just...
So my understanding is that in the past 30 years that Mike has worked on this system, he has not found a really good explanation, a really good trend for male quality. It seems like my impression about it is that they're more likely to make complex calls when they're in competition with more males. But all males seem to be capable of being able to make the complex calls. If males are bigger, then their calls are slightly lower in frequency just because of their size. And that might indicate some aspects of quality. And I think females prefer males with slightly lower calls.
Right. So so it's often that two males near each other in a chorus will both make the toon, like the first part of the call, like just the whine part, and then the female will approach. And so this is really anthropomorphic, but I always feel like the male's like, all right, maybe I have a chance. And so then he'll add the chuck onto the end of it.
Yeah.
And so, if this male adds a chuck, then this male might add a chuck. So they'll try to outcompete each other. So, it could be something where he's like, oh shit, I don't want to die if there's a bat there, but here's my chance with this female.
Yep.
So it's not as if he's out there like making a whine with 3 chucks, just like throwing it out there to, like a suicide mission for himself.
Yeah, they're really flexible. So if a Tungara frog is out there by himself, he'll just make a whine occasionally every couple of minutes. And then if there are more males around, maybe he's got less of a chance of being eaten, or there's more chance for going to be a female around, they'll up the number of chucks they're making. So they can make up to 7, make somewhere between 0 and 7. And they're pretty flexible in what they're going to choose to do in a given situation.
So do you want to say, so now that it's your 5th year, right, you're thinking about postdocs, looking for postdocs.
Yeah.
Do you want to stay on do you want to focus on an organism? Do you want to focus on a question? Do you want to stay with bats?
That's a great question, Heidi. I have generally become really interested in, my most recent stuff has been on social information use. So I've been focusing on, we, like all animals, have access to information we learn ourselves through sampling the environment, through trial and error learning. We also have access to information we get from observing other individuals. And I've been really interested in when, my work has been with bats, but when animals are using social information versus when they're just sticking with information they've acquired themselves about the environment. And what I'd really like to do is take those questions and apply them in systems that are more tractable than bats, where I can get more animals and that they're more easy to sample. And I'd love to stick with bats. Bats are really cool, but I'm hoping to diversify and work in some other, maybe diurnal, perhaps, systems instead a little bit too.
So are you interested in that purely from a sort of phenotypic plasticity kind of angle, or like indirect genetic effects and that kind of thing?
No, I'm really interested just generally in how animals are integrating information when they're making foraging decisions, how they're integrating different sources of information just generally in cognitive ecology, kind of. And it'd be great to look at genetic differences in whether some individuals are more likely to use different sources of information or not, but I haven't even trended that direction.
Yeah, I'm sure like just as I mean, bats are so big and your numbers are low. I'm sure it's, you really want to downsize. Yeah.
I would
you
love
want to go to
to.
insects.
I do. I really do. Bats are, I mean, they're spectacular. These animals are just incredible animals, and they're so charismatic, and that makes them really cool to work with. But they can be, we pretty typically in Panama, it's not unusual for us to go 2 weeks of mist netting and not catch a single individual of this species. And then for me to do these social learning tests I've done, it would take me at least 2 weeks to test an animal if like all things went well. So getting sample sizes of like, 5 bats in a treatment is like a year of work. And that's still, barely enough to be able to do stats on. So yeah.
Wow.
They're really cool animals, but their sample sizes are painful.
Yeah. Sounds like you need to move on to Ormia.
I need a little break. Yeah, I need a little invertebrate break, and I'm excited about it.
I mean, there are small vertebrates. I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah, frogs are great for doing sample sizes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, you have to compromise for, exactly what you want to do. I understand. There are people that work on crickets, You can't always choose.
Man, you should see my sample sizes.
If you had 5 crickets, Tom, what would you name them?
Probably like 1 to 5.
I let my field assistants name all of our bats, and so we had some pretty good ones over the past few years. Yeah.
You probably run low on bat names, but
a lot of them were food names, like cupcake, pork chop.
You might want to feed your field assistant.
Middle of the night, 7 p.m.
They're like, anything but oatmeal. Could you come here? No more rice and beans. Learning the task.
Yeah, it's kind of indicative.
Yeah. I think that's why I chose frogs, because I wanted something that was small enough that was tractable like in a lab environment, but also, something that had a spine that I could see in the field. But yeah, I understand.
Well, C. elegans is like on one extreme up here.
Please, C. elegans. Because I just came back from doing an experiment for like a week. People were saying, "Oh, did you miss them?" There's really not much to miss. Like, there's something quite satisfying about working with someone small that you can just pick up on, platinum wire and put to a new habitat, But there's no like, "Aw, there they are. I think that an else 3 stage." No one misses that.
I get that. And I think I will miss the bats. I miss mist netting. Mist netting is really fun. Like the part of Panama where we work, there's more than 65 species of bats. And so, being able to have catch that kind of diversity is really cool. It's really fun.
That always seemed, I've never done any netting, but whenever I see people at field houses with like the crazy bird things, I guess the mist net, you just set it up. Those people that have like the long poles, first of all, I could probably just use my arms. People that have like the long ass poles, I'm like, God, how physically taxing would that be? That's crazy. Yeah.
I like how Heidi is now the human mist netter.
That's my superhero name.
If we ever go mist net bats, yeah, Heidi, I'll just make you hold the net.
Yeah, that's crazy.
With your 6-foot wingspan.
Can you just stand here? Yeah, that would happen. How much time during your 5 years, have you spent just doing field work?
I spent about 2.5 years of the past 5 in Panama doing field work.
How many? I forget because you spent like a year there, right?
Yeah, I spent, I think, a year and a half was the longest stretch that I was there. Wow. Pretty much continuously, with some trips to have my visa renewed.
You're allowed one day.
With that much time in the field, you must have some cool field stories. Do you have a favorite tale that you might be willing or able to share with readers?
Somebody asked me this the other day. It's hard to think of something.
Brushes with death.
Well, I did have. Speaking of brushes with death, we certainly had lots of bat adventures. And I'm not. Did you guys freeze? Are you still there?
Nope.
No.
Okay.
Good.
Actually, you know what? I don't think that's an appropriate story for me to tell.
It definitely is. We'll totally edit it out.
Yeah, it's probably appropriate.
It makes me look kind of weird.
Unless someone died, like
Nobody died, and we handled it to the best of our abilities. But it was a cool. We had my first set of field assistants there, and it was the first day that I let them misnet, and I was nearby, but I was not providing like hands-on assistance with all the bats. And I had one of them come running to me and say, "Patty, there's a bat in the net, and it bit Christina, and Christina's bleeding, and the bat is bleeding, and like total bat disaster." And I went to see, and we had never caught before a vampire bat in this part of Panama, and nobody had ever caught them there before. And so I went to see, and here was this vampire bat that I hadn't even taught my field assistants how to recognize because I didn't think we were ever going to catch one. And it was unhappy and had probably vomited its blood meal all over itself and bitten my field assistant, who had this amazing, this is why you should edit this out, as it makes me look like a very irresponsible team leader, but she had this really perfect, vampire bat had this distinctive tooth shape, and she had this perfect vampire bat tooth mark, and due to the anticoagulants in their saliva, was bleeding everywhere from this little bite in her thumb. And we took care of it, and she had her what?
Did the blood shoot out?
And no, it just kind of kept streaming. It was really impressive. And so we dealt with it and let the vampire bat go, and she got her booster shot, and everything was fine. But
God, I hope she didn't end up going to med school.
Well, the best thing about it was thanks. The best, she kept telling people oh, I got bit by a vampire bat, and everybody who was a non-bat person was like, oh my God, that's terrible. And all the bat people were like, cool, we want to see. And
show us your thumb.
Yeah. So I'm a very irresponsible graduate student with my field assistants, but that was pretty cool.
I don't think that's irresponsible at all. What a cool story. Did it leave a scar? That's pretty awesome.
Yes, a little V-shaped scar. So the rest of her life, she can brag to people about how she got bit by a vampire bat.
That's really great.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous of her.
I am too.
I got scratched once by a snapping turtle, and it was only a little superficial scratch. But I wanted people to see it. I'd be like, "Oh, what's that?" People are like, "What happened to your hand?" I was like, "A snapping turtle scratched." I was picking it up. Maybe it was a baby, maybe not. All right, but
it broke the skin. It totally counts.
I know, but a vampire bat—that's
vampire bat's pretty badass.
I did get bitten by a cricket once, so it was pretty cool.
Bad bites from katydids, so I understand that.
Yeah, they're a bit more intense. My crickets are rubbish. They're totally pathetic, and they don't break the skin. That's why I wasn't really expecting it. I was visiting a guy up in St Andrews, and he had different crickets. So I was just had one in my hand, and I was like, "What is this doing?" It was just gnawing away at me.
That's crazy. So is that a new species record for vampire bats there then?
I don't think for that site, but I don't know how long the records have been kept for that spot where we were. I don't think that they have been very intensely. The only place where they have been is on Barro, Colorado Island, which is nearby, but it's across the canal, where they've really been keeping better about keeping records than we've been. Certainly was for our group, which has been there about 10 years.
Cool. So do these frog-eating bats, do they only eat frogs, or do they get to do they eat other things as well?
They eat lots of other things, and we know that they certainly will catch an insect that's flying around when we have them in the cage. If we have something else gets in there or is flying around, they'll eat it. They'll eat little lizards if they can catch them. They seem to be, so lots of bats, we think of bats usually as using active echolocation to find their prey items, right? These frog-eating bats are much more passive locators, so they're listening for the frog calls, or they're listening for an animal rustling through leaf litter, like a lizard running through the leaves, or the sound of an insect flying. So they're not as good, they're really quite bad actually at locating prey items that are not making any noise. So some of the stuff that I've been looking at is some of the katydid species that they hunt by their calls also, that they're sort of eavesdropping on the calls of these katydid species. And at the moment I'm conducting some lab work where I've got fecal samples from more than 100 bats that we've collected over the past 10 years. And I'm DNA sequencing the prey remains in these fecal samples to figure out exactly what species of, hopefully, exactly what species of frogs and insects and lizards the bats are actually eating, which would be great. Because all we really know is when we bring them into captivity and we play them a suite of frog calls or insect calls, what they respond to. But we don't know how much of that makes up their diet in the field, or if they're eating other things or what. So, but lots of insects and frogs and lizards, and there's some records of them eating other bats, and some records of them eating birds.
That's some pretty hardcore bat.
Mm-hmm. They're not very big. They're only about 30 grams, but there's some little mannequin bird species that are quite a bit smaller. So they're sort of a couple of anecdotal notes about them eating small bats and small birds.
Wow. It's the honey badger of the jungle.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's pretty cool. Now I'm just imagining the poor little mannequins doing their little dance and just getting totaled by a freaking bat.
Wiped right off their little display branch.
Yeah, I think that's the moral of the story. It's like, if you want to be a showy bastard, like these frogs with their complex call, or like the mannequin displays, you're going to get taken out by a bat.
Yeah.
Exactly. We can always hope that this will also happen to Justin Bieber at some point.
Well, I did train my bats to cell phone ringtones for this social learning experiment that I was doing. So if we get Justin Bieber's phone to play the right ringtone, I may be able to get a bat to attack him.
Could we train a bat to just attack Justin Bieber singing?
Absolutely.
This is a foolproof plan. I think we could solve a lot of problems here.
Yeah.
So if you're listening at home and are sick of Justin Bieber, we can kickstart some funding for Patty to.
But I think, this little bat this big would probably be more of a pest than an actual, selection event. But
yeah, but if you train enough of them.
Yeah, he gets mobbed by
to
bats.
pick him up and carry him off.
Oh, I don't think he doesn't look that big.
That's just compared to you.
Tom, I knew you'd take that personally. You're like, I looked it up, Justin Bieber and I are the same size.
He's probably like a monster compared to me as well. Patty, can you tell us a little bit more about what you were doing with this cell phone ringtone thing? Was it an actual experiment, or were you just fannying around?
It was an actual experiment. So what I wanted to know was this question that I was talking about earlier about when does an animal use social information to learn. In this case, I wanted to look at to learn a novel prey cue. So we know that these bats forage on frogs by listening for the frog calls. And my co-advisor, Rachel Page, who's at the Smithsonian in Panama, has demonstrated that really quickly in captivity they can learn to associate novel acoustic stimuli with food rewards. Or she even trained them to approach poisonous toad calls that they would never normally go to. So we know that they're very flexible in this behavior. And she also had a paper where she showed that by observing another bat foraging, a bat can learn to approach a novel prey cue, novel acoustic stimulus. So I wanted to know, what are the conditions that affect when a bat's going to do that? They're capable of using social information to learn novel prey, but when do they do it? When could you actually expect them to do it? And so what I did was I took bats and I trained them to a cell phone ringtone that was either consistently associated with food rewards or only associated with food rewards half the time. So I was trying to mimic a situation in which they had a prey item that when they heard the frog calling, they always got a food reward. They had really high capture success, or they only got a food reward half the time. They had lower capture success for this prey item. And then I exposed those bats to a conspecific tutor bat that I had trained to a different cell phone ringtone that was novel to my test bat. And the tutor bat was foraging on that new ringtone that was always associated with food rewards. And I looked at when does my test bat, how does their food reward schedule, does that affect when they're likely to learn to approach novel prey by observing conspecific tutor foraging. So I was trying to mimic a natural situation in which a bat who's having pretty good foraging success in the field, are they paying attention to what another bat near them is doing, or are they just sticking with a strategy that's working out pretty well for them? Whereas if they're having poor foraging success, are they more likely to pay attention to what another nearby bat might be foraging on and learn to predate on some new frog species? But I wanted to use these very artificial stimulus ringtones that the bats would have had no previous experience with. And it does seem that when their prey item, that their ringtone they've been foraging on is not reliably associated with food rewards, they're more likely to learn to approach these novel ringtones that are demonstrated by a tutor bat.
Why ringtones? I've always wondered this.
Versus, so I debated using...
Because I just always, when I think of it, I think of like just the iPhone ringtone, you know, and like I always think it's really arbitrary, like who uses what. And yeah, did you use the iPhone ones?
They're like, I think one of them, I can't remember right now where they came from. They're pretty standard. One's like a little ringing sound, and the other one's like a doo-doo-doo-doo-doo sound. I don't know. They're ringtones. But I debated using like the calls of some non-native frog species, or bird calls, or something that would be unrelated, you know, that they wouldn't have heard before, but still would be more of a natural sound. But they generalize really broadly. So Mike has a paper that showed that they will generalize non-native toad species. They also won't approach the calls of non-local toad species, because those are similar enough to local toad species that they recognize them as unpalatable. And they will approach the calls of frogs they've never heard before, but if the calls are fairly similar to ones they've heard before. So I wanted something that sounded totally artificial, but wasn't just a pure tone, that had some sort of recognizable variation to it.
Cool.
So, ringtones. And they're, fun.
They're free ringtones, not ones you had to pay for. No Bieber songs.
Right.
That's awesome.
Public access.
You definitely need to just try that next time you're in Panama. Get someone to phone you, and then you get covered in bats and you get your escape.
That's the thing, your paper, if you have that, because you know you should use a video for the training part, like your paper will get so many more hits on it if it has music. Because remember the bat fellatio video?
Yes, I sure do.
That one has like weird 70s porn music. It's but like that's the weird thing about that video. Like animals.
That's the weird thing?
That's not that weird. Come on.
Yeah, the bat fellatio is not that weird. The music that they chose to like add to it is a little weird.
Like one bat comes in like a plumber suit, and the lady's like, no, but the music's so hokey and weird. I don't even understand. I mean, I would be embarrassed to be on that paper because of the music. That's what it's about, not because of the name, not because someone's boss showed it to me, because of that music. That's what weirds me out.
I agree with Heidi.
Yeah, weird music. Like if that's what you're doing, you're gonna set something to music. Use neutral music. Use a ringtone. So they should have gone with.
Yeah.
Awesome. So does anybody have anything else? Final comments? Patty, do you have anything you want to shout out for the one person currently viewing, or the several dozen that may listen to it down the road?
No, I don't think so. Bats are awesome. Be nice to your local bats, but don't pick them up.
Awesome. That's a pretty good point to end on. And we'll continue working on the Justin Bieber defense system, I think.
Yeah. I can make that happen.
Tell a bat to attack a cell phone. You can certainly have a whole bunch of bats attack some Batman device.
Passy, you could make this and patent it and make a fortune from people like Morgan.
Yeah,
exactly.
If the bats are, you only have to teach a few of them. Then it becomes a new concept. Like, how many bats need to know the rule of attacking someone after the Batman theme is played to get someone mobbed by bats?
Social
Introduce
learning.
it back into the wild.
Yeah.
I see this is a totally fundable idea, and I'm sure the Department of Defense will be on top of it in no time.
Yeah, it's totally true.
All right, that was a good little tangent, but I guess we will actually wrap it up. So thank you very much, Patty, for joining us on episode 28 of Breaking Bio. And if everybody's at home watching or listening, you can find us at breakingbio.com or at breakingbio on Twitter. So thanks again, and we'll talk to everybody later.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye.